broadcast on the net, videos like tonight's being recorded, and all sorts of media. And the last thing there is our lounge and drop-in area. So this place is open, I think Schreiber mentioned, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's maintained by a dedicated core group of volunteers I'm quite happy to work with. And so you're all welcome to check us out 1 to 9 every day and watch a movie. We've got an extensive collection back there, it's growing. Read a book, join one of the hobby groups. We do have a website. If you haven't signed up to get on our mailing list, please do so. Provide your mailing and email address. We can get you emails once a week and mail in terms of flyers and that sort of thing so you can be kept in the loop. And I should also put a little plug in. If you do enjoy these events, do consider becoming a friend of the center. There's a good student rate, about $20. Adults a little bit more, about $60. It is kind of a nice way of showing your support for currently the premier, the only venue in the country for humanists and freethinkers, so do consider that. As I'll move on now to actually talk about this event. It's a really great pleasure for me, a great privilege to be able to speak alongside others whose important words and deeds have resulted in violence or the threat of violent reprisal. I'm only going to speak briefly because many of you have heard me speak before, and especially on this topic, and I do want to give the bulk of our time to our new guests. Thomas Paine had a saying, "He who dares not offend cannot be honest." This is absolutely true, and I think it's a truth too often missed in our politically correct, obsessed society, that freedom of speech and the right to offend are two sides of the same coin. During the Mohammed cartoon controversy last year, there was a rally in Queen's Park during which hundreds of Muslims were there. They were chanting all sorts of chants. One of the things that I heard was, we want freedom of speech to protect our rights. We don't want freedom of speech to criticize our beliefs. But there really aren't two kinds of freedom of speeches, and that's something I want you to keep in mind. Let me briefly go through the details of the incident that happened to Peter and myself, for those of you who are unfamiliar. It happened at Ryerson University the morning of Wednesday, March 28th, around 1 a.m. My colleague Peter and I were postering for an event, Schreiber mentioned, God, the Failed Hypothesis. Next slide. So, that's the poster, the infamous poster. So the event was called God, the Failed Hypothesis. It was by Victor Stenger on his book by the same name. Now you might be thinking that 1 a.m. is a rather dangerous time to be doing anything at Ryerson University, let alone postering for such a controversial event. And that is true, but you see, we had little choice. We have been postering, oh, that's not somebody upset with my presentation. We have been postering for a week leading up to the incident, and we discovered that within an average of about an hour, any given poster would mysteriously vanish. Not quite mysteriously, since as we found out when we put up rows of posters above one another, the row of tape remained. People had literally just walked straight past posters, grabbed a whole clump, and left them on the ground. In any case, we thought that by blanketing the campus with posters in the dead of night, at the very least, students would be unescapably bombarded by their sight the following morning. And we would send a clear message that rather than being intimidated or frustrated by the extent, to the extent that we would stop postering, quite the opposite, we were raising the ante on the vandals. Unfortunately, the vandals chose to raise the ante on me. We were on the second floor, Peter and I, by the cafeteria when we noticed two individuals very interested in the content of the posters. One man approached to inquire as to what we were doing. Peter matter-of-factly handed him a poster and invited him to the event. He looked at the poster, mumbled under his breath, and threw it to the ground. Whereupon I picked up the poster and yelled after him words that would come to haunt me to this day. "You could have at least recycled the poster." That's all I could muster. Should have said anything. The two men were outside the building at this point. They laughed, indicating they had heard me yell something, and that was it, so we had thought. About 15 minutes later, we were postering in the tunnel between Jorgensen and Kerr Hall, the two main Ryerson buildings, when the two men caught up with us. Now, if you're familiar with Ryerson campus, you'll know that the tunnel area is very secluded. At about 1 a.m. at night, there's actually a fair bit of traffic around the cafeteria where the initial encounter took place. But in the tunnels, there's really no one. This fact alone seems to indicate, or at least hint at premeditation on the part of the assailants. Plus the fact that they were premeditating some kind of physical altercation seems even more likely, given that they had to run to catch up with us. They were literally out of breath when they found us. Brushing past Peter, the second man who wasn't involved in the previous encounter says, "We have words with your friend," and coming right up to my face demands that I apologize to his friend, the guy I had initial words with. I was on the phone with my girlfriend at the time. I told her to call security, to which the individual replies, "We're not going to wait until security arrives. You have 2 minutes to decide what to do." So I said, "What happens after 2 minutes?" Always the inquirer. To which he responded, "Wait and find out." Right? I'll make a long story short. His claim was that rather than the innocuous comment about recycling he thought I had made, he thinks I said something far, far more offensive, which was, "I believe what I want, you believe what you want." This supposed defense of the right to express one's beliefs was seen as terribly offensive to him. When I refused to apologize the manner he wished and continued to cling to my insistence as to what I had said, the first man walked over, smacked me in the face twice, saying, "Watch your smart mouth," and then headbutted me hard in the face, causing my nose to bleed. Though the public seemed to understand that this incident was in every way as serious and as worthy of hate crime designation as one in which a religious person is assaulted for their religion, I have serious concerns about the way in which the incident was downplayed by the press and the police. Many who should have known better actually said that I should have expected to get beat up for not only being an atheist, but daring to come out of the closet as one. I believe the Varsity U of T newspaper summed it up best with the classic line, "If you're going to crack wise to just anybody on the street in the dead of night, start working on your left hook and leave the charter defense to the real victims." Thankfully, all the letters of the editor slammed that editorial over and over again. It's actually a rather interesting note, the dichotomy between the position taken by the media and legal authorities using the letter of the law as a sorry excuse to downplay the situation, and the public, on the other hand, would seem to understand the need for the law to catch up. But putting that aside, I think there's a much larger issue here. This man thought I should apologize for defending my right to a difference of beliefs. Now, ironically, that isn't even what I said, although I kind of wish it was. Incidents involving affronts to the free expression of atheists are admittedly fairly rare, though of course that's partly because atheists don't wear distinguishing clothing or other trinkets. I think it's important to realize and appreciate that when an atheist does advertise his beliefs, or lack thereof, or falls out of line with the prevailing zeitgeist of society, there is probably an increased chance compared to a religious person self-proselytizing of a confrontation or threat developing. A few examples are in order to prove this, and they are somewhat anecdotal based on my personal experiences. Firstly, the Free Thought Association of Canada Vice President Programming, Emily Porta, unfortunately not with us today, was proudly sporting her No God pin. I think I have a couple of these. They're terribly offensive. They have a God with a line through it. If anybody wants, they can come take a look. They are on sale for $2. When she was pulled aside by her residence Don, because someone had anonymously complained they were offended by said pin. Now, to be fair, the Don was rather respectful of the whole situation, but I can't help wondering if the Don would have approached, however respectfully, a Sikh man wearing a turban to ask him in the name of race relations to please remove his turban, however respectfully, because it offended a Christian. I realize wearing the turban is part of the 5 symbols of Sikh belief, and hence, to the Don, a no God pin is hardly in the same plane of meaning. But are they really different? My point is that they're really not. They're both expressions of belief, a free expression of the right to be offended. Think about the hypocrisy of allowing Kirpan daggers into public classrooms, but asking an atheist ever so kindly to please remove her pin in her own home. That is what her residence is, right? Comparing these two situations, I hope to do the sort of consciousness raising Richard Dawkins attempts when he asks people to consider the absurdity of labeling 4-year-old children as Muslim, Sikh, or Christian, any more absurd than labeling 4-year-olds as atheists, agnostics, or secular humanists. And do read his book if you haven't, The God Delusion. He talks about consciousness raising a great deal. I hope I can do a little bit of that today. Another example that comes to mind involved the same Peter Aruja from my assault incident. Peter, who seems to have a knack for pissing people off, who was wearing a pin with a line bigger than Jesus. When a man took offense to this and wasn't placated by Peter's clarification that the phrase referred to the fact that better nutrition made it likely Peter was physically taller than Jesus, a verbal spat resulted. Too bad I wasn't around to tell them. They were both wasting their time with such a dispute. In fact, it is likely Jesus never existed at all. I would have cleared matters up. Finally, and most shockingly, my atheist activist colleague, Chris DiCarlo, famous for his We're All African lectures, told me just last week about a series of incidents, one after the other, sparked by a Jesus is Borg slide. Please look at that. This is the Jesus is